I'm Scott Alan Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. I love it when something controversial comes up on the WhatsApp expats group because I am desperate for topics over the last few weeks. And so whenever something comes up, I latch onto it and it gives me a chance to make a video. That's exactly what I'm going to do today. But before we do that, I'm just going to say real quickly that the project I've been working on for nearly 3 weeks came to fruition today, and I got to have an MVP. That's a minimum viable product release party with an internal team. It was an amazing time. We had 22 people on the conference call demonstrating the new software, doing some training, getting it out and into production, actually into production for multiple companies today. So that was huge thing, like a weight off of my chest. I'm excited and happy, and it went really well. And so hopefully I'm going to be a bit more available as we go forward. So that was a big thing that I know has been taking a lot of time. It's still going to take a lot of my time. I've got a lot of stuff going on, but that was like a death march trying to get that product out the door, and we did it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the way we should mentally think about tax evasion when we're talking about the U.S. or we're talking about Nicaragua. And of course, this applies to lots of other places too. We're going to use them as examples for expats when we're thinking about how we're trying to avoid taxes, something that's generally pretty important for a lot of people. So we're going to talk about that right after the bump. Most Americans can tell you that taxes in the United States are a really big deal because we have some of the world's highest taxes, and where they are so high that actually a lot of Americans struggle to really define even what are their taxes. A lot of our taxes are hidden in a lot of places that we don't really think about, and so our taxes are not just on paper one of the highest in the world, but once you actually calculate what it truly is, it's astronomical in a lot of cases. So Americans are very concerned about taxes as a general thing, and we've talked about it a bit recently. Now, today's topic has nothing to do with those, but I do want to point out that in those videos, I talk about income taxes and how they apply when you're an expat. And none of that is about evading taxes. It's all about appropriately paying your taxes, which is the whole point of those videos, is that the U.S. gives you certain tax breaks on a really heavy-handed tax system, and you shouldn't be avoiding them. I mean, unless you're making a donation. If you don't, right? It is a really heavy tax burden that you don't have to pay all of, and it's just given to you under certain circumstances. We're just explaining that, but at no point are we doing anything that is related to evading any taxes. That is completely the opposite of what the videos are about, and nothing is about finding tax shelters or anything like that. It is the opposite, right? The U.S. is a tax shelter. Nicaragua is not a tax shelter, right? So it's all about paying appropriate taxes, and I'm not an advocate that taxes should or shouldn't be paid. Only these are the rules, and this is how you pay them. If you want to pay your taxes, and if you want to avoid paying your taxes, then you're on your own. I'm not going to give you advice on that, but it basically comes down to simply not sending in the money that you owe. It doesn't take a lot of advice to not pay your taxes, right? So that's its own thing. And everyone makes their own decisions about it. When you are an American, though, there is a certain amount of mentality that everyone wants to avoid paying their taxes. And because taxes in America generally go to systems that we feel are extremely corrupt and stealing our money, because taxes are basically taken at the end of a barrel, and a gun barrel that is, and are used for things that very few Americans approve of, right? Often money goes to war machines that we do not agree to pay for. They go to enforcement of laws that we do not agree with. They go towards funding programs overseas that many Americans don't agree with. Many do agree with some of these things, but that's part of the problem, is you have very little agreement as to how the government is spending the money. And so the average American, does not approve of where their tax money is going. And a huge percentage of them actually thinks it is immoral to have their tax money be used in the way that it is used. So to Americans, especially in a country that was founded on the principle of tax evasion, that was the founding principle of the United States, right? There had been a war for which military had been dispensed to protect the American colonies. And when the colonies were expected to shoulder their portion of the cost of that war, they used the financial deficit of their parent country to be able to fund their own war against them to become independent. So America's founding principles, beyond religious cults and slavery, were tax evasion. So Americans are deep rooted in the concept that not paying your taxes is a good thing, and that governments getting taxes is a bad thing. And the way that the United States government behaves is a reflection of that. Once you have that mentality that the government is never going to use your taxes for good things, chances are you're not going to regulate it to do good things. And so the U.S. has a tendency to misuse taxes that it gets very heavily. And so we end up in this situation where many people disapprove of the tax system. They disapprove of how much they're taxed, or disapprove of how it is spent. And then they believe it is their ethical responsibility to not pay their taxes, or at least an option to say that that is why they don't pay their taxes. And I agree. There's really good arguments that ethically paying your taxes in the United States may not be the best thing. The law does not reflect ethics. Right? Morality dictates that maybe following the law is not the thing to do. So we totally understand this in the United States, but it's roughly a unique situation. There's others that definitely follow a similar path, but that is not the norm worldwide. Most governments have much smaller tax bases and use the taxes much more heavily to provide necessary or critical social services and other things that benefit their populace or other populaces, rather than doing damage around the world. And that's the fear that most people have with American taxes, that your tax dollars are used for harm, not for good. Many people do not agree with how taxes are spent in other countries, that the good that they do is not good that people want to spend money on, but that's very different than it being unethical to do so. We're going to feed the poor. Well, you can't make an ethical argument that feeding the poor is bad. You simply can't. If you do, you're being unethical, and we all know that. We don't have to explain it. We know that feeding the poor is good. Now, that doesn't mean you always have to feed all the poor, right? We don't have to give up everything to feed all the poor. And that's where tax decisions get made. How much taxes should go towards that, right? Should we provide unlimited food for unlimited amounts of income? Should we provide some for those that are in extreme poverty? Those are gray areas as to what's the best use or reasonable use of the funds that we have available. But it is not an activity that can ever be seen as unethical. Well, they're poor, they should starve. No, we all know that's not ethical to intentionally starve anyone simply because of their economic situation. Right, so most countries, the bulk of their taxes is used for things that are very difficult to find any fault in, other than the balance. Right. So this is a key difference. So Americans naturally jump to, and other countries to some degree, but Americans strongly jump to this idea of, if you can get away with it, that's okay. Right. Stealing from your neighbor, bad. Right. We all get that. But stealing from the government, that we mostly all agree on is bad. Is it bad to steal from an oppressor? Because the Americans see their own government as an oppressor of the American people. So it's a form of it's a form of protest against the government. It's a form of fighting back against the government. That's the mentality that a lot of Americans have. When we then go abroad, we often bring that mentality with us. Like many other things about being American, when we go to other countries, it's difficult to separate the world that we're moving into from the world that we're from. This is normal, right? This has nothing to do with being American. It's just how things are. But America is a very large country, and so we get this isolationist simply because the country is so large that if you're from Iowa, the chances that you've traveled to another country, low, but the chances that you've traveled to another state, very high. Especially if you're from Iowa, you've always wanted to go to another state at every moment of every day, right? So you've probably traveled around, but all the places you travel to, or nearly all, share the same things, right? Oh, the taxes that we pay are the same as the taxes you pay. They go to the same things that yours do. We all don't agree on it. So avoiding taxes across that shares a similar mentality. You know, a lot of people don't want to avoid paying their taxes because they're scared of it, but very few people feel that paying taxes in the United States is an ethical responsibility. That's a unique thing. But because America is so big and people are so isolated, I don't think very many Americans think of it in that way. It would be actually quite surprising if they did. So when they go to other countries, they often bring this mentality with them. And it's not something they're necessarily, and almost certainly are not, thinking about, because it's been ingrained in us since we were little children. The reason you pay your taxes is not because you should, not because those taxes are helping people, but because you could get in a lot of trouble if you don't, and we're scared of the government who's oppressing us. So we must do what keeps them happy. Totally understand. Lots of people obey the law because the law is scary, not because they feel that they should or that they want to, right? That's partially why we have a law, right? If people wanted to do the right thing and the law was the right thing, we wouldn't need laws. People wanted to do the right thing, right? And if someone didn't, it was an accident, right? It was intentional. But we have laws because we as a group decide or the government simply decides for us what we have to do, and it is forced upon us whether we want to or not. And I'm not saying that laws are a bad thing. What I'm saying is that the concept of why people do the things they need to do is often simply because the law says that they have to, and there are punishments if they don't. So that is often why people are paying their taxes when they do. When you move abroad, you still have to pay taxes in the US, that's separate. But in the country that you're moving to, we often bring this mentality with us, because why would we reevaluate it? We're not consciously doing this. That's the important thing that I'm trying to drive home here, is this becomes a subconscious thing from the time that we are small children. Growing up in America, I never had this feeling that anybody felt that taxes were a good thing. We all felt that they were bad and went towards bad things. So we always saw them as a thing to avoid at all costs. If you could get away with it, you generally can't, so you don't. When you come to a new country, why would you reevaluate that? You wouldn't. This is just what taxes are bad, right? And then you get to a new country, and yes, you may over time learn that, well, they use taxes for good things. They're not waging foreign wars. They are not using them to oppress people. They are not using them to fund, private back channel money grabs. Like, they're actually being used for social services, to build parks or roads or trains or new airports or whatever, social programs, right? Putting on concerts and handing out food, right? Nice things. Maybe you don't agree with the balance of where they go, but the activities are not bad ones, right? So this is how it's used in many countries, in most countries, I would argue. And so when you learn that, you may be very pleased to learn that the taxes that are collected are going to good things and have visibly good results. That's wonderful, but we don't stop generally and reevaluate this mentality that is built into us that taxes are inherently evil. And so it is easy to fall into a trap of trying to avoid paying taxes when there's no reason to. And this is what came up in a conversation today. Was someone was asking about simply buying a car, and someone suggested this process that is sometimes passed around in expat circles, that I'm sure some locals do it as well, but I've never heard a local suggest this, and I've never heard isolated expats talk about doing this. It is unique to areas where there's a number of expats together, and this information seems to get passed around. Maybe that's just my impression of it, but this is what I have gleaned from people who recommend it, that you get it in San Juan del Sur, you get it in Granada, this knee-jerk reaction of, oh, you want to buy a car, here's how you avoid paying taxes on it. And there's a process by which you can sneakily, get someone to kind of do something illegal over here, get someone to pretend something over here, not do the paperwork over here, and then for the most part doing the things that they have to do just a little bit to avoid some transfer taxes. And it's just a natural reaction. Well, this is just what you do. And then because it's what you just think you do, why would you intentionally pay taxes if you don't need to? Then it becomes a natural, your brain wants to defend it. And of course, many people who are recommending it have done it. So they want to defend that they've done it, because suddenly there's a guilt feeling that doesn't feel comfortable. And it's like, wait, could there be something wrong? And so you get a natural reaction to it. But the thing that's important is that there's this reaction quite quickly in expat circles that I don't experience other places, where people are naturally trying to get involved in tax evasion. And immediately the question becomes one of, well, it's very hard to get caught. And that may be true. It may be completely legitimate. People may do it all the time and not get caught. But the difference is, if you were to say that in the United States, we would all say, oh, really? There's no way to get caught? Well, that's pretty fantastic. We don't feel that paying taxes is good, so why would we do that? But when you're in a really poor country that depends on your taxes to feed people and to create jobs and to keep the economy going, and those taxes are used for good things, not for evil, and you are a guest and you are here from a richer country and your tax dollars are critical to that economy, why would you ever cross an expat's mind to avoid that? And the answer is the things that I explained, because we come from a place where subconsciously it is so ingrained in us that tax evasion is a good thing if you could not get caught, that of course we're going to carry that on in most cases. And that's why I want people to stop and think. That's why I'm making this video. I'm not saying that tax evasion in the US is a bad thing. I would probably err on the side of, I wish everyone avoided paying their taxes so the government would collapse. That would be a great thing. And yeah, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that. Not really. I'm allowed to say that. I'm an American. And I'm not saying you should do it. I'm just saying it would be neat if everyone did it all at once. And that's certainly not going to happen. And that's the problem, right? Is that people have to do it in, oh, one person did it. Did it affect anything? No, because a certain number of people always do it. And the other people simply shoulder that burden as they raise the tax base. So it doesn't actually have the positive effect that you might think that it does. But that notwithstanding, when you come to Nicaragua, or to any country, right? Especially any poor country, any country that is dependent on the tax revenue that's letting you in the hopes of getting that tax revenue, that uses that tax revenue to feed its population, to provide medical services and so forth. Paying those taxes is not just an ethical duty, but it's your reward. It's a thing you get to do, right? You get to positively impact the country that you're in. That's why we're here, right? We're here to do good. Sure, we want it to be nice for us too. I'm not saying that we didn't come to and choose a country because it's the right thing for us, but having the opportunity to have a positive impact, why would we voluntarily give that up? And very importantly, especially in places like Nicaragua, the taxes are quite low. Why would there even be a need to not pay the taxes on a car, or especially a motorcycle, especially a used one? We're not talking about new ones. You're not going to get out from paying your taxes on the new ones. You got to find someone who paid taxes on a new one, is going to sell it, and is willing to take on a risk where they're involved in tax evasion so that you cannot pay the taxes when you buy it from them. That's the thing that triggered this discussion. I'm sure there's a lot of different tax cases, but importantly, I've never met in person anyone who would do this. It just never comes up. It seems like a crazy thing. Once you stop and say it, everyone goes, but what's the benefit? The taxes are so low. What are we talking about? $20? Why would you? And the effort and the cost, it's not free to do this, right? You got to find a notary that's willing to do it. You've got to find a seller that's willing to do it. And then you have to take on the risk of, one, possibly getting caught for tax evasion, and two, and you get stuck in a situation where maybe someone's going to take off with your vehicle, because if you're leaving that vehicle in someone else's name and you're claiming it was never transferred to you legally, then if they take it and sell it to someone else, your ability to fight that is pretty darn low, because you would have to claim you didn't pay your taxes, which is not something you generally want to do. Now, maybe the risk of doing that is less than the risk of getting your car back, but that car is sold, and probably sold legally, and we've heard a lot of horror stories of people who've done this, and that's exactly what's happened. Their vehicle is gone, and they have no recourse because it wasn't their vehicle. So sure, you can end up in a situation where you totally trust someone. I know people who've done that because they don't want to go through the paperwork, and they having a local have the vehicle in their name, but that's a different thing. That is not tax evasion. That is putting the paperwork in someone else's name to avoid paperwork, right? And I strongly recommend against, but it's not unethical. It's just, I feel, a weird thing to do. I think the effort of putting it into your name is worth it to protect yourself and just to keep friends friends. But if you have that situation where you're able to do that, that's perfectly fine, not a problem. I don't recommend, I'm never going to recommend that. Like, that just is, I've never heard of someone doing that it didn't end up poor in the end. But when it comes to normal transactions, the value to not paying your taxes is so low, and the risks, while maybe not super high, maybe it's really easy to get away with it, just aren't that big. But when it comes to normal car transactions, trying to avoid paying your transfer tax on buying a used vehicle, because it's always a used vehicle, put a real number on that. How much money are you trying to save? And remember, you're talking about saving that money from the Nicaraguan people, not from the American government, not from a war machine, not from, a huge multi-trillion-dollar government that is definitely going to use that money to fund a private company somewhere and pay off someone's buddy. That is different. Right? We're talking about money that would be used for someone's health care, for someone's blood transfusion, for an ambulance, for a new park, for a kid's educational program, right? Those are the things that are not getting paid from that money. And someone can try to make up some story about how that's not how tax money gets used, but you go around this country, no one has been in this country and seen how the money is being spent, how little is being collected, and how much is being spent on the people, and can ever claim anything to the contrary. That money comes back. Many people actually remark that it seems like more money comes back to the people than is collected in taxes. For every dollar that goes out in taxes, it seems like $1.50 comes back. Like, it's mind-blowing how many services are provided by the very small tax base that is being collected. To take away from that is not something we should be doing. It should not cross our minds as something we would want to do. And we certainly don't want to be recommending that other people do that, because it's not helping them. We're putting them at risk, maybe not a huge risk, to maybe save a little bit of money. But the problem is, and this is something we mentioned on the channel, on the discussion group, is that if you move to Nicaragua and you're new and you ask a bunch of expats, which is the normal thing you would do, right? They speak English, so, and they've been through the same things as you. They have the same concerns as you. So asking expats seems like the right place to go, and often it is. That's fine. Quite often in expat enclaves, you'll get people who are just like that, going to recommend how you can do tax evasion. They're not going to say, boy, it's so cheap, just go buy a car. They're going to go, here's how you can avoid paying the little bit of taxes that you actually owe. And sure, there's some risk, but it's not that. You'll never get caught. It's not about getting caught, right? It's the whole process doesn't make sense. What are we protecting against? It's a solution without a problem. It's nice that we won't get caught, and I don't believe that that's true. And when people have done this, they seem to have stories of problems that other people don't have, which makes me think that they're getting caught in a soft way, like someone knows that these behaviors are happening. And so, right, like, think about if you have, even in the United States, if the police have someone that they know is a criminal, but they can't actually prove it easily, and they're not a terror, like not like a murderer or something, then they may be apt to give them a really hard time. And in a way that if the person was truly innocent, they would push back and it wouldn't actually happen to them anymore. But if they are guilty, they may be very apt to give in because their fear is that they're going to be investigated, right? That seems to be a trend of kind of how it seems. People who are doing this also seem to have stories of run-ins with the police where they feel that negative things are happening, right? And those of us who are not doing things wrong are not having that feeling. So there seems to be a correlation. Now, is that actually a correlation? Does it just seem that way? It's very hard to say. But in getting this recommendation, those stories were tied with it, which definitely suggests that that is potentially a correlation. So my whole point of this is nothing to do with cars or transfer taxes or any real specific activity. It is, one, that we need to be aware that when talking to other expats, there are some of these kinds of things that it may be even groups of expats who've never evaluated these things. It's also possible that it's groups of expats who are simply acting badly, right? Both are possibilities, but it's given the benefit of the doubt. This is a reasonable situation where you have a group of people who've never stopped and said, ooh, this is a subconscious bias I have. Now, I think in most cases, this isn't people who are truly trying to get away with anything. That's not really what's happening here. What's happening by and large, I'm not saying that no one is, somebody is, obviously, but by and large, what's happening is you have a group of people who are so ingrained that this is how you have to think and approach the world, that subconsciously is just part of who we are. We grew up with it. It is built in. And what would trigger us to ever stop and think about it again? Why would we want to pay taxes? But wait, we might actually want to do that. Or more importantly, paying them may not be a very big deal, and we're happy to do our part, and there's no real value to trying to get away from it. Now, in this particular discussion, we did talk, and someone did come out and say, oh, they were thinking that the thing they were getting away from was a really long paperwork process, which may be true some of the time, but for many people isn't, or has improved over time, or is getting better, or whatever. And that's a completely different argument. Well, I would love to pay my taxes, but they never let me. Well, that would be different if that's what's happening, and maybe it is. Sometimes, I know I've registered a car in half a day, when everything goes smoothly, at least when everything goes smoothly, right? It can be a complicated process for sure, but that being just one thing, it's just this important mentality that I don't think people are really consciously coming out and saying, well, I want to get away with something, right? That's not it. It's that we think we have to, it's built in, and it's time now, this is why I'm bringing it up, for us to step back and say, wait a second, this is not something that's beneficial to the community. We are not making positive social commentary. We are not forming a form of political protest through tax evasion. That's not what's happening. What's happening is we're carrying over a mentality subconsciously and forgetting or not noticing that we're in a completely different scenario that would require that to be fully reevaluated, because the factors that make us behave one way where we're coming from or feel a certain way, not that very few people are actually involved in tax evasion, right? But this mentality that it's something that maybe has a positive aspect is no longer there. And that just because you can get away with it doesn't form a great reason to do something. Oh, right. No, I don't want to get away with it. Of course, once you stop and talk about it, it's not that hard to realize. But why would you stop and talk about it? You wouldn't. That's why we're having this video. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAllenMiller. And as always, watch another video that does help, and share this on social media. Tell someone about the show, and I will see all of you tomorrow.